Hi, everyone. I am so excited because I am speaking with author Matthew Fitzsimmons. And here we go. Brand new book coming out September 1st. And I always like to show this part because this is what you see on your bookcase. I mean, it is so simple, but it's so meaningful, Matthew. When you read this book, I have to tell you, because I'm talking to my audience who's not a sci-fi audience, and neither am I really. But I have to tell you, you got me in the first chapter. I was kind of scared because I'm like, what if I don't like it? I'm not familiar. But I'm telling everybody out there, he will hook you. This Constance, you will love her. And it was such a great story. I am so happy that I read it. So I'm going to let you tell us about this story because it is crazy. It is a crazy story. But, you know, some stories, if they're too crazy, I can't go there. This one was real enough that I was like, huh, I started to look at my life a little differently, I have to tell you.
Well, thank you. That was sort of the goal with it. I've written, this is my sixth book, and the first five were part of sort of a more conventional mystery thriller series with a more conventional, well, I guess both protagonists are conventional, but when I had the idea for it, the book is about human cloning. And the idea for it came from I like to play this game with myself where I try and take a familiar story idea and see if I can twist it in an interesting way. And I do that at night as I'm going to bed sometimes. And one night about 5 years ago, when I was writing my second book, I said to myself, how could I contrive for someone to investigate their own murder? And I tried to think of examples where that had been done. There's a great old 50s movie called DOA, which was remade with Dennis Quaid in the 80s about a professor who's poisoned, and he has to figure out who's poisoned him before he dies. But he's still alive. I was so how, because it's sort of antithetical, how can you investigate your own murder? And I thought of some supernatural possibilities, and that didn't really interest me. And I'd sort of given up on it. I was lying in bed, and I said to myself, well, what if it was a clone? And I sort of did one of those movies, sit up in bed, upright in bed things. And I hopped out of bed and I went to my desk and I worked. It was about midnight and I worked all night. I took notes and I started writing ideas down, and I wound up writing the first chapter, which now is the fourth chapter. And then I put it in a drawer and I didn't really touch it for 4 years. And eventually I sort of felt ready to try it. So the story came from, you said you don't really read science fiction. And I thought that was a really interesting challenge, is how to get people, the publishing business is so much pick a lane, stay in your lane.
Right.
And when I pitched the idea of this, people were like, well, that's not your lane. I said, but it is my lane, because this is a mystery. And the twist of it is that the hero is both the detective and the victim.
It was incredible. And I was talking to some of my children about it too, because it's not that far. It's not that far in the future. We're talking 2038, 24, right? And you know how when we were in 2000 and you were thinking about 2020 and you were just like, oh my God, that just seems so weird, right? Like having 2020. And that's kind of how this feels. It's like, oh, that's 20. Okay, so that's 17 years from now. I could still be here. Who knows?
Right,
I mean, the possibility exists. And who knows by then, like who knows, like maybe people are living lots longer. And the cloning idea is just fascinating, because I was putting myself kind of in Constance's shoes. And I love how you did, and I don't think this is a giveaway because this is in the beginning of the book, of the protesters, because we have pro clone. I love this idea. We have pro cloners, okay? And then we have the people who are, which you would think are like the religious bunch, right? Who are like, no, it goes against everything
Well, I
godly.
thought about that. I mean, I think there would definitely be there would be some people, I thought back to when we first had in vitro fertilization
Right.
back in the
That's
80s.
what oh my God, that is so what I thought of. I so thought,
And it
because
wasn't,
we're like the same age. I'm probably older, but I mean, I remember that.
and she was called the test tube baby,
Test tube baby.
and everyone was very uncomfortable. There was a lot of discomfort around it. And
Yeah.
it wasn't always religiously based. There was, the interesting thing about it was that the discomfort, I think, was sort of universal. It was taking something that had been done a certain way for
Ever.
all of human forever, and saying, no, we can now do it this other way. And now, 40 years later, in vitro fertilization is millions of people do it a year.
Absolutely. I know people, like, it's not a big deal anymore at all.
So I thought, so how would people respond to cloning? How would this new technology, because in the book, my timeline is that basically the company that starts cloning starts in 2020. They're a little startup in Cambridge, and they're puttering along, and then the US military gives them a contract, and then it sort of breaks out wide open about 2033, and all of a sudden the world has to grapple with the morality, the ethics, and who would have a problem with that. And I think it's a much larger, the group of people who would be against it would not just simply be one group. I think some religious people would have a problem with it. But I also think people on the, with a different viewpoint would also find it questionable. And so that was a really interesting thing to sort of think through, and how the world would react to something so new and scary.
So I kept thinking, like, what do I want to be cloned?
Right.
Because that isn't a perfect, it's not perfect, So she has struggles right away, right from the bat. So it's almost like, I don't know, because you don't really like the clone. I don't know. It gets very confusing as to like what the clone knows. So when you're saying you're cloning yourself, are you really like,
I think you really hit the nail on the head. That was one of the interesting ideas of it, that so the two technologies that the book depends on, both of which exist to some degree, one is cloning, which we do every day in this country. And the interesting thing about human cloning is we clone human cells every day in medical research.
True.
We are clone. There are no federal laws governing cloning. It is, and that's how the book presents it, is a state by state issue. Who can do it and who cannot. What we don't do is take a human embryo and clone it and bring it and make a person. That's the bridge that the book crosses. But the way the book, the way I designed it is that it's essentially an insurance policy, right? So you're a client of the company. Yeah. And we upload your consciousness and store it on a hard drive. And in the event that something terrible happens to you, we download that consciousness into your cloned body that we've got on hand. And what they're selling is you get to carry on. But then the idea that I run with is that gap of memory, that from the point at which we uploaded your consciousness to the moment of your death, there would then be this gap of memory, which the book calls lag, and which the plot of the book depends upon. And how terrifying that would be if you're trying to convince yourself that you are still you, but you're missing this a week of memories, 2 weeks of memories, a month of memories. You don't remember the critical end of your life moments. How is that going to affect you? How is that going to throw you off your axis?
Yeah. And, even thinking about like people are worried about population control, right? So this is what I was thinking about. This is how my head went. Because so I was like, okay, what would be the advantages of cloning? Like, there are people in history, like I wish they could have cloned Steve Jobs. Okay.
Right. Okay.
There are people that you would think Bill Gates, like there are these people that you would like say, okay, well, that's purposeful, right? Like to keep them going on and on. And, but then you have the question of would they go on? Like, how is that with their brain? I don't know. It's such a wild concept. I love the fact that it made me keep thinking about it. When you can't put a book, that's the epitome, right, of a good book is like you put it down, but you can't stop thinking about it. And I've done it. I've been done reading it for a day and a half, and I still am talking to people like random people. Do you ever think about cloning? Do you ever think about it? Because it's just one of those books that has there are so many questions. And so it's like, if you do, if you don't, why not? Why, what is the good things I can think about is like diseases. Like if you could cure certain diseases through cloning, right? But then it's awesome.
It's an interesting. That is your reaction is really gratifying here. I haven't talked to a lot of people who've read the book yet, and my hope was to write that on one level it's just a really exciting mystery right. and a right. thriller. But then because really this book just came from it would be fun and cool if I could write a book where someone had to investigate their own murder. The cloning thing almost came second, but right. once it was there, I sort of did the same thing you did. I said, well, what would be the ramifications? What would the questions be? So the idea that you would read it and enjoy it and just be like, oh, yeah, that was a fun read. But then also that it would, I think that's every author's.
Yeah. But also that you can't stop, that conversation with somebody. And that is, not only that, is just that I fell in love with Constance. And I love that you called her, I don't know, she's Con, right? Yeah. And instead of Connie, I kept thinking Connie, right? Like any Constance I knew, which aren't many, they were Connie. So at first I was like, Con, okay, all right, I can get used to this. Like I can get used to the nickname Con, but I loved her, and I loved her clone. I loved it. And it was just such an interesting, because the beginning is when you fall in love with her, and then the journey of her and her clone is just, it's crazy. It's nothing like I've ever read. And that is why everybody should read it, because it's nothing like they've ever read.
That is one that you made my day. You made
my I read a lot of books, let me tell you. So, but anyway, I want you to tell everybody, because I went on your website and I love the story that you told about your dad and Star Wars. Because that's my age. We went with my family, we went to the drive-in. That was where we saw Star Wars for the very first time. Right. My brother and I went with my parents, and I think our generation, that's kind of how you did it then. Like we weren't quite old enough to go see a movie alone, right? So you relied on your parents, and we're sitting in the back seat, of course, because they're in the front seat, and there's this huge movie, and you're just like, wow, like blown away. Even in the drive-through, you're blown away by this movie. And then go ahead, you tell.
So, I was born in Chicago, but when I was about 3 years old, my dad was working at a bank as a sort of an entry-level guy. And there was a bank in Chicago called Northern Trust, and they walked in and said, Tom, we need you to go to London with your family, start packing. And so we left Wheaton, Illinois, and we moved to London in 1973. And I grew up in London, which was just kind of a magical and lucky return. And we spent the summers in America. And we'd come back and spend the summers with my grandmother in Michigan. And Star Wars came out that summer, but I didn't get to see it. There wasn't a movie theater where we were in Michigan, but it was everywhere. Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars. And we went back to England, and Star Wars, so back in the 70s, American movies didn't come out in Europe for 6-8 months after their American. Nowadays it's sort of everything starts all at the same time everywhere in the world. But back then, so England spent 6 months getting Star Wars crazy, watching across the pond as Americans were losing their minds over this thing. So Star Wars opened in England on Christmas Day, and in my stocking, Christmas morning, were tickets to the Leicester Square Theater where Star Wars was debuting. So I went opening night in England. And we went to see Star Wars, and I was 7 years old, and it was the greatest thing that I had ever seen and would ever seen. And I was immediately in love with it. And I look over and my father's asleep. I mean, just out cold. In his defense, he'd been up all night wrapping presents and assembling things. And he's not really a movie guy anyway. He doesn't really, it's just not, he does not, sometimes I worry that I'm adopted because we have very different interests, but I was sort of horrified. I'm like, how can you be asleep for stuff? Dad, wake up. You have the Wookiees, the Death Star, come on. And he was like, and this is how he sleeps. I was like, I'm just heartbroken. I can't.
Did you ever watch How I Met Your Mother?
Yes.
Okay, do you remember how that's how they would judge their girlfriends on what they thought about Star Wars?
No, I don't remember that.
Yeah,
but that sounds like
okay. So Ted would date, because How I Met Your Mother, like it's his dating thing. But if they didn't like Star Wars, it was over. That was it. And so he would put them in a room, and he would like go to another room and watch them watch it. And if
because Barney had a stormtrooper.
Yes, he had to start.
Right.
They were all into it. But if the girl, one of his girls, like she was like, it was okay, and he was like,
get out of my house. That's kind of how I felt about my dad.
Right, that's what I was thinking. I thought about that. I was like, that those writers thought about your concept. Okay, it was like if you can't get through, if you don't like Star Wars, it's over. You can't. All right, everybody, look, go get this book. It is so good. I am so happy I read it. And I'm so happy that I got to meet you, which is always my dream after I get done reading a great book, is to meet the author. So I am so happy that we got to talk about it. Made my day.
So much. It made my day. Knowing that you read it and you enjoyed it. It's you're sort of waiting to see how people are going to
well, I think
react to your book. So
it will be different when it comes out September 1st. So you can go pre-order it on Amazon right now, and then you can have it. It'll be delivered to your door and/or your Kindle on that day, which I always love so much. But thank you again, and I can't wait to see what this is going to do. And I will be on social media promoting this for you. Because
I thank you so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Until your next book. Oh, before I let you go, so what's next?
I am actually writing a companion book to Constance. There is a second chapter of the book.
Yay! That's what we want to hear.
It was not originally my plan. I originally envisioned it to be just Constance. And
I don't know. When I got to the end of it, I had some thoughts. Just so you know.
I did. When I was writing, I was like, nope, this is going to be just that. And then I took a shower, and by the time I got out of the shower, I had an idea. I knew what the second book was going to be.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I called my publisher. I was like, would it be okay if I wrote a second one? And they were like, yeah, let's do that. And so
Well, that means we get to talk again.
I look forward to it very
because
much.
I will definitely want to read the second one. So you have a great day. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.